Hello and welcome back to Something Z, and welcome to What If Deku had Venom Part 6. Last time on the What If, Izuku and Bakugo were freed by All Might and a group of a mixture of pro-heroes and police officers. But while Izuku and Bakugo got saved, Shigaraki bonded with another symbiote, becoming Riot. Then later, the provisional license exams took place. But because Ida was dead, a decent amount of Class 1A failed the first phase of the exams. And shortly after the second phase of the exams took place, with it just finishing while Izuku was fighting Gang Orca. Okay, so now that's out of the way, let's jump into the video in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so we begin this what if around half an hour after the exams took place, and currently everyone was getting dressed back into their school uniforms. And when Izuku was done getting out of his jumpsuit under the symbiote, he went back to the arena. And when he got to the arena, he saw that the main examiner was on a podium, and next to him was a giant board with everyone's names. And after a couple seconds of scanning, Izuku was able to find his name. And once he was able to find it, the main examiner told everyone that if they failed the exam, there is still hope, because the failures will be able to take the exams again after taking an extra course. And once he said that, the people that passed went to go get their pictures taken, and a couple hours later, Class 1A made it back to the dorms. And after a couple hours, people began to go to sleep for the night. And because Bakugo knows about Venom, and because Izuku got captured with him, Bakugo doesn't completely put the blame on himself about All Might losing his powers and retiring, and how Izuku has progressed so much in such a short span of time. So the fight between Bakugo and Izuku doesn't happen. Okay, so now we skip to the next day, and when the day began, Class 1A went to an assembly along with the rest of school. And when they get there, they learn vaguely about the work studies. Then once the assembly was over, they questioned Aizawa about this. But no matter how much they pestered him, he wouldn't give them an actual answer. Okay, so now we skip a couple days, and when the day began, 3 older students walked into Class 1A. And when they were ready, they began to try to explain the hero work studies poorly. But after multiple failed attempts, the blonde-haired student told them all to go into the gymnasium. And after a couple minutes, all of Class 1A was able to get into the gym in their PE clothes. And just like in the canon, Todoroki decided to sit out, because he felt like it was pointless to learn about the work studies now, because he failed the exam. However, everyone else that failed was inspired to prove that they were going to pass next time, so they decided to at least try to fight this upperclassman. And once the class was ready, the fight began. And when it did, Mirio's clothes phased through his body. And once the clothes hit the ground, Mirio was gone, with him falling into the ground. And seeing this, everyone put up their guards, trying to predict where he would appear. But after a couple seconds, Mirio jumped out of the ground in front of Jiro, and before she was able to react, Mirio was able to hit Jiro in the gut, making her fall to the ground. And seeing that, the long-range fires began to shoot out their attacks, but everything they fired just seemed to go through him. And seeing this, the melee fires began to speed towards the threat. But before the melee fires were able to get to Mirio was able to take out all the long-range fighters, and a decent chunk of the mid-range. And after a bit of fighting, the only 3 left standing were Mirio, Bakugo, and Izuku. And when the 2 were ready, Bakugo and Izuku sped towards Mirio, and when they got to him, Bakugo, while flying straight at him, fired an explosion at Mirio's head, while Izuku shot out a web at Mirio's feet to try to stick him to the ground. But when the attacks were going to hit him, Mirio just phased through them, with the explosion hitting nothing and the webs hitting the ground under Mirio. Then once Bakugo landed a couple feet away, Mirio ducked and he grabbed the web that Izuku just shot, which was still connected to Izuku. And before Izuku was able to detach, Mirio began to spin the web, making Izuku get thrown around. But after a couple seconds of this, Izuku let go, with him almost hitting a wall. But before he made impact, Izuku shot out more webs at the ground, and he used that to slow himself down. But while Izuku was trying to reorient himself from spinning, Bakugo was still fighting Mirio. But eventually, he launched himself at Mirio trying to go in for another punch. But when he tried to, Mirio phased through the fist. And while Bakugo was flying, Mirio moved with him, going for Bakugo's eyes. And seeing this, Bakugo closed his eyes. And while Bakugo couldn't see, Mirio moved his other hand towards his gut, and he punched him as well, making Bakugo flying into a wall. And when he hit the floor, Bakugo was out of commission. Then once Bakugo was out, Izuku was able to recover. And once he was able to recover, Izuku ran towards Mirio and the 2 began to fight. But thanks to Izuku and Venom's super sense and reaction time, it was hard for Mirio to hit him. And the 2 couldn't hit Mirio because of his permeation. But after a couple minutes, Izuku and Venom began to lose steam. Also, their heads were constantly tingling, because they kept on feeling like they were in constant danger. But after Izuku dodged a punch, Mirio sank into the ground. And before Izuku was able to move, Mirio shot out of the ground before he completely sank, making Mirio uppercut Izuku in the gut. And once Izuku got hit, he fell to the ground as well. And because everyone in Class 1A that participated was on the ground, Mirio was declared the winner of the match. And once everyone got back to their feet, Mirio gave a speech, telling them that his quirk used to be weak, and how he used to be dead last. But then he told them that he began to train like hell in order to catch up. And he ends the speech by telling them that's why he believes the hero work studies are worth it, because it's a way to turn experience into power, and allows them to get stronger. And shortly after the speech, Class 1A goes back to their classes while the big 3 go back to their dorms. And while they were walking back to their dorms, Nejire asked Mirio if anyone caught his eye during the fight. And he responds by saying that Izuku is interesting and he could be useful to Sir. Okay, so now we skip a couple weeks, and while Izuku was having lunch with Ochako, he was called into the teacher's lounge. And when Izuku got there, sitting on 2 couches were All Might and Mirio. And when he sat down, he was told that he got an offer from the pro hero hero Sir Night-Eye for the work studies. And hearing this, Izuku accepted the offer. So a couple weeks later, Mirio and Izuku walked into Sir Night-Eye's office. And when Izuku got into the agency, he was immediately told about the Shiazaikai, because in this, he was actually given an offer. And unlike the canon, he didn't have to do the test against Night-Eye. And shortly after Izuku was briefed on the Shiazaikai, he and Mirio were sent on a patrol around the city. And while they were on patrol, Izuku and Mirio talked to each other about themselves, such as their quirks and hero names. And with this conversation, Izuku was able to learn that Mirio was actually holding back on them, because apparently he has another quirk that's similar to All Might's, and the fact that it's a power booster quirk. And after some time, the two come across an alley, but before the two were able to walk past it, Izuku felt a tingling sensation in his head. And when he looked at the alley, he saw a small girl running towards him. And when the girl got to him, Izuku hugged her. And when his arms were around her, Izuku and Mirio both looked into the alleyway. And after a couple seconds, the two saw a person start to walk out of the shadows. And when the guy was in the light, the two saw that it was actually Overhaul, the guy that Sir just told them about. And when the two recognized the man, Overhaul told the girl that was named Eri that she was disturbing the heroes and that she should hurry back to his side. But for the whole time that Overhaul was talking, Izuku wasn't paying attention to him. And instead, he and Venom were focusing on how the girl was trembling in their arms, and that she had bandages all over her arms. And seeing this, Izuku and Venom began to think about how they should take Overhaul out. And after a couple seconds, Izuku's eyes got serious and intense, and he began to raise an arm to shoot out a web. But seeing Izuku's eyes, Mirio knew that he was going to do something, so he quickly put Izuku's arm down. And he told Izuku that they really should be returning to their patrol. But Izuku still wasn't completely there, and he and Venom were focusing on their target. So after some time, Overhaul told the two heroes that he will explain everything if they just follow him into the alleyway. Then once he said this, he began to walk away. But before they could follow him, Eri runs after him when she sees him start to take off his glove. And with the event being over, the two just continue on with their patrol. And when they get back to the agency, they tell Sir what happened during the patrol. But when they were done explaining what happened during the patrol, Sir began to lecture Izuku, getting mad at him because he could have ruined the whole operation if he had gone through with it. And he eventually tells Izuku that he can't do whatever he wants, because he's not as strong as All Might. And with that, he can't do whatever he wants. And shortly after Night-Eye's done lecturing Izuku went back to UA. Okay, so now we skip a couple days, and once Izuku was ready, he began to leave to go to Sir Night-Eye's agency. But while he was leaving, Sue, Ochako, and Kirishima were leaving to go to their work studies as well. And seeing this, the group decided to go together until they need to split up. But after around half an hour, the group ends up at Sir Night-Eye's agency, and when the group hero walks in, they see multiple pro heroes in agencies, with some of them being Facom and his agency, Ryuku and her agency, Rocklock, some old guy Izuku recognized when he got rescued, and their teacher Aizawa. And after a couple minutes of the pro heroes talking to each other, Sir decided that everyone that wanted to join has arrived. He then led everyone into the meeting room, and when everyone was seated, the meeting began. And during the meeting, the pro heroes discussed everything they knew about the Shiazaikai, and eventually they came to the conclusion that the group was using Eri's blood for anti-quirk bullets. Then once the meeting was done, the students were sent out of the room so that the pro heroes could discuss classified information. But after a couple minutes, Aizawa walked out of the room, and he went over to the students. And when he got to them, he told them that he wants them off the mission, because the League of Villains seemed to be involved. And with what happened to Izuku, it doesn't seem like it's a good idea for him to be around. But because he knows that Izuku would go even if he was told no, he told the students he would allow them to follow through, but he told them that they can't be stupid, and they have to stay safe. Okay, so now we skip a couple days, and when it was early in the morning, Sir Night-Eye called everyone that was in the meeting back to his agency, and when they were all there, he told them that he was able to get the information that he needed, so he knows where Eri's being held. And after talking for some time, Sir told them that they will be going there the next morning. Okay, so now we skip to the next day when it was around 8 AM. And when the raid began, a police officer knocked on the front door, and they shouted that they have a warrant. But right after they said this, a giant villain burst through the wall and he flung some police officers. So Ryuku's agency went to fight the villain, while Sir Night-Eye's agency, Facom's agency, and some police officers ran deeper into the base. And when they got into the actual base, they got surrounded by more goons, which Bubble Girl and Centipede were able to distract, allowing the rest of the group to continue on deeper into the base. But for some reason, the deeper into the base they went, Izuku and Venom felt a pull, as if they're getting attracted to something. But the two were unable to figure out what it was, even after multiple minutes of running with the group. But after a couple minutes of running, the group comes across a wall, and seeing this, Mirio ran at the wall as fast as he could. And when he got to the wall, Mirio phased his head to the other side of the wall, and just like he suspected, it was just there to block their path. So Izuku then shot two webs at the wall, and when they were connected, Izuku pulled on them, launching himself at the wall. And when he made impact with the wall, it made a decent sized hole, which was big enough for the group to go through, allowing them to continue running. Then eventually, after a couple more minutes of running, the group comes across another wall. And seeing this, Mirio increased his strength, and he ran straight through it. And he saw that again, it wasn't an actual wall. But even with that, he decided to keep on going, to get to Eri as quickly as he could, because he felt like it was taking too long. And seeing this, the group increased their speed to try to catch up to him. But after a couple seconds, Izuku began to feel a tingling sensation sensation in his head, and after a couple seconds the floor under the group disappeared. But when it did, Izuku shot out a web at the wall, and he used it to bring himself to the wall. And before the group was able to fall too far, Izuku shot out multiple webs as quick as he could, making a makeshift floor under the group. And with that, the group had only fallen around 20 feet. And once Izuku got back up to the floor, he began to help the remaining group members get back up, with that taking around 6 minutes. And once the whole group was able to get back to where they were before, Izuku and Kirishima broke through the wall that Mirio faced through earlier, which allowed them to follow after Mirio. But even though the group was in a different section of the base, Mimic still continued to attack them. So while the group was running, Mimic shot out a pillar at Aizawa. But before it could hit, Kirishima and Fat Gun pushed Aizawa out of the way, and in exchange, they got hit instead, and they got pushed into a different room, splitting them up from the rest of the group. And after a minute of trying to figure out how to get the two back to the group continued on. But after more time, the hallway started to twist and contort. But this time, Rocklock used a special move to make the walls stay in place. And the moment Rocklock did this, Mimic began to shoot out walls, making the group get split up into different rooms. And when the walls were placed, Izuku and Aizawa were trapped with each other. And seeing the new walls, Izuku punched the wall that was right next to him, creating a hole that was big enough for the two. And when the two walked into the room, they saw two Rocklocks, with one being on top of the other one. But the one on the bottom seemed to have a stab wound, and he was bleeding out. But being able to see through this disguise, Aizawa used his quirk on the top Rocklock, which made her quirk get deactivated, which also made her face start to melt, revealing it to be Toga. And once she was revealed, the three began to fight. But after a bit of time, she was able to stab Aizawa in the shoulder, which was only deep enough to draw a bit of blood. Then when she stabbed him, she was able to get out of the room, and she escaped into the room Aizawa and Izuku came from. And when she went in, she got out of Izuku's view, and seeing this, Izuku ran after her. But when he went into the next room, she was completely gone. And seeing this, Izuku decided to forget about Toga, because right now he thinks it would be better to focus on what he needs to do now, instead of a potential threat. So he then began to break down the walls, which led to the rest of the group. And after a minute, the group was able to come back together. And shortly after the group was able to reunite, they began to run down the hallway again. But after a couple minutes, Mimic decided to attack the group again, so he began to sink the ground under the group. And seeing this, Izuku tried to figure out where Mimic was. But after a couple seconds, Izuku was able to find out easily, because, to the group's surprise, Toga and Twice seemed to be riling up Mimic on purpose, making him begin to shout at the two. And hearing this, Izuku was able to pinpoint his location, so then Izuku shot out a web, and when it connected, he flung himself at the ceiling and he punched it as hard as he could, which broke off a chunk. And when that chunk fell, a piece of Mimic was revealed. And once Mimic was revealed, Aizawa used his quirk to cancel out Mimic's quirk, which made Mimic get pushed out of the ceiling, and he began to fall. But before he hit the ground, Surge threw his high-density shield at him, which when they made contact with his head, made him pass out. And once he was knocked out, Izuku grabbed him and he used a web to slow down the descent. And shortly after the two got to the ground, Izuku shot out webs to tie him up. And when Izuku was done with that, Izuku, Aizawa, Sir Night-Eye, and Tamaki continued on, while the rest of the group watched over Mimic. Then after a couple minutes of running, the three were able to finally get to the end of the hallway, and when they did, they found themselves in a big room, with Mirio and an already fused Overhaul fighting, while Eri was a couple feet away, wrapped in a torn Mirio cape. And seeing this, Izuku began to run towards Eri to try to get her away, but while he was running, the tugging sensation that he had been feeling this whole time began to increase tenfold. And when he looked behind him, all he saw was a dark shadow-covered wall. But when Izuku looked closely, he saw that there was a spot with a darker blue, and there was a giant fang-covered smile. Then once Riot was discovered, he leapt at Izuku, and the two symbiotes began to fight. So currently in this room, there are two fights going on, with Riot and Izuku going against each other, while Mirio and Overhaul were fighting. And seeing this, Night-Eye began to get Eri to safety, and while he was doing this, Tamaki ran over to Mirio to help him fight Overhaul, with Aizawa following closely behind him, with him trying his best to help Mirio because he knows that symbiotes aren't quirks, and he knew that it would be useless if he helped Izuku. Okay, so Izuku began to fight Riot, but for some reason Riot was weaker than the last time they encountered each other, because not only did he seem to be physically weaker, but Riot wasn't disintegrating anything. But anyways, they clashed, with Izuku and Riot trying their best to beat each other, with them both being very hard to hit. And Izuku was fighting Riot using a mixture of webbing and his tendrils, while Riot mainly used his tendrils and fists. But after a couple minutes, Izuku lost control of his emotions fighting Riot. So while Riot was in the air unable to move out of the way, Izuku made a spear tip on one of his tendrils and he shot at Riot, and it hit him in the gut. And when it hit, Riot stopped moving, with it falling to the ground and it began to die. And once Izuku realized what he did, he quickly absorbed the tendril back into his body, and he went to check on Shigaraki. But when he did, he realized that Riot, instead of bleeding blood, it began to bleed mud. Then after a couple of seconds, Riot turned completely to mud and dissolved, revealing it to not be the real Shigaraki or Riot the whole time. Then shortly after Izuku was able to beat the fake Riot, the three were able to take out Overhaul, with them weakening him to the point where he wasn't able to move as fast as he would normally, with the fight ending with Mirio punching Overhaul in the face, knocking him out. And once Izuku saw that Overhaul was knocked out, he ran back to the group as fast as he could, and when he got to them, he told them that Overhaul had been defeated. And shortly afterward, the group put anti-quirk cuffs on Overhaul. And because Night-Eye wasn't actually in the fight, he is still alive, and the mission wasn't considered a failure because less damage had happened around the area, because it was all mainly contained on the streets, base, or in the actual base. Okay, so now we skip a couple hours, and all the people that were injured were taken to the hospital. And on the way to the police station, the same things happened with Overhaul. So he got his hands cut off, and Shigaraki now has some anti-quirk bullets. Okay, so now we skip about a week, and when it was time for class, Aizawa announced that they will have to come up with ideas for what they want to do for the upcoming school festival. And after some discussion, they decided on a dance. And the next day, Izuku and Miri went to visit Eri in the hospital. And Eri was in the hospital because Overhaul was their only known relative, and they didn't trust her enough to put her in a normal orphanage because she has such an unstable quirk. And when they get there, they asked her how she was feeling. But it was obvious to the two that Eri was still sad and shaken up about what had happened. So the two began to think, and after a couple minutes, the two ran to Aizawa and they asked him if they could bring Eri to the festival, which Aizawa agreed to as long as someone kept their eye on her the whole time. Then shortly after they got the confirmation, the two students went back to UA to get ready for the festival. Okay, so now it's time for me to explain what Izuku's doing for the dance. And basically, it would be around the same as in the canon, with him holding up Ayama. But instead of just running on the rafters, Izuku has to swing around while he carries Ayama around, while he's shooting out lasers to make the lasers look like they're dancing around. Okay, so now let's get to the day of the event, and because Izuku doesn't need a rope, he doesn't need to go to the store. So the show's about to start with the beginning in about 20 minutes. But while Izuku and Miri were outside talking to Eri, Izuku's head began to tingle, and he began to feel like there was a threat nearby. But because it wasn't an imminent threat, Izuku was trying his best to figure out what it was. So he told Miri to watch over Eri while he figured something out. Then after a couple of seconds of looking around, he notices two people that seemed too old and too young to be students, and they didn't seem to be any staff he knew. But what the most incriminating thing was the fact that they were in a tree, and the young girl that he saw was holding a camera typing while the old guy was holding up a camera. So Izuku then covered himself in venom and he shot a web over the two, and he sneakily landed on top of the tree above the two. And while Izuku was above them, he was listening into their conversation, and they were talking about how almost all their preparation was done, and that in a bit they will be able to start the broadcast of them in UA. And hearing this, Izuku began to focus more closely on the two, and when he did, he recognized them as Gentle Criminal and La Brava. And seeing this, he realized that he needed to take care of them, because if footage got out of a villain sneaking into UA, people would have less faith in heroes, and UA as a whole, which is very fragile right now because of all that's happened. For instance, the summer camp attack, him and Bakugo getting captured, and All Might retiring. Then after a bit of time, the Bravo said that the connection has been secured, and because of that they can start the broadcast. And hearing this, Gentle began to turn on the camera. But seeing this, Izuku shot out a web at the camera. And when it hit, he quickly pulled on the web, making the camera fly into his arms. Then seeing this, the two looked up. And when they did, they saw Izuku standing under a branch above them. Then once Izuku was spotted, Izuku shot out another web and he grabbed the laptop in the same way he grabbed the camera. Then once he grabbed the laptop, he put the two electronics into one hand, and he began to swing away deeper into the forest and farther from the campus, because he wants to make sure that no one else sees the fight between him and the two villains. But after around 30 seconds of swinging, the air in front of Izuku solidified, with it becoming an air trampoline. And when Izuku hit it head on, he got launched back, with him getting flung back to the ground, with him landing on his back, with the pieces of tech landing next to him, scratched, but not damaged enough to make them stop functioning. So once Izuku landed, he got back up. And when he was standing, Labrava and Gentle were able to catch up to Izuku. And when they did, they told him to give them back their equipment, or there would be consequences. But hearing this, Izuku knew that this will keep on going as long as the two had the goal to film themselves breaking into UA. So Izuku shot out a web and he hit the camera again. Then once it hit, he began to pull. But when he did, instead of pulling it into his hands again, he made it go flying into a nearby tree. And when it made impact, it broke immediately. And the second he did this, Gentle got serious and furious. So he then made the ground under him springy. Then he leapt at Izuku to try to hit him, but Izuku was able to dodge out of the way with ease. So the two began to fight, with Izuku trying to end the fight as fast as he could, because he didn't want to miss the performance. But it was hard, because whenever Izuku would try to move, Gentle would make air trampolines, making Izuku just punch nothing. But while Izuku was fighting, Venom noticed that the trampoline stayed for a bit of time, and once he told this to Izuku, Izuku used this to his advantage. So Izuku then shot out a web at the air trampoline, which bounced off, then it hit another one, and after it ricocheted, it hit Gentle in the eyes, blinding him. And when Gentle couldn't see, Izuku began to beat up Gentle, and then after a couple seconds, Gentle was knocked to the ground. And when Gentle was on the ground, Izuku shot out enough webs to make him get stuck to the ground. And seeing this, Labrava ran to Gentle to try to save him. But seeing this, Izuku shot out more webs, which made her get stuck to the ground as well. And when she got stuck, Labrava began to scream for Gentle, but because Izuku wants this to be under wraps, Izuku shot a web over Labrava's mouth, making her unable to speak. Then once the two villains were unable to move, Izuku swang back to the campus, and he then found Hound Dog and Ectoplasm who were on patrol, and he told them where the villains were located and what their intentions were. Then while the heroes went to take care of the trapped villains, Izuku went to the performance, with there being no problems, and by the end of the dance Eri smiled. And while this was going on, Gentle and Labrava were sent to jail, because Gentle wasn't able to take the entire blame, thus making Labrava go with him. And everything from here on out will be around the same, with Endeavor trying to become the new #1 hero. And I guess that's where I'm going to leave What If. It's been a lot of fun making this, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope to see you next time on Something Z.